Hey everyone, it's me Ryan here. Today we're going to talk about Nier. I did my best to avoid the hype train like most of you with Nier Replicant, but with its release less than 24 hours away, or having already arrived by the time you watch this, I think it's time we get on it and ride it into the station. I'm sure some of you won't forgive me for that terrible pun, and I totally understand. Essentially what my aim here is to give you an idea of what you'll need to know going into Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139. I said all the numbers so you know that I'm serious. I always say if you want to go in with as little information as possible, skip this video. My own process is I don't look at anything or look at as little as possible, and then when it's close to release, consume a select amount of content or remain blind going into it. It really is the best way to experience games and any other entertainment product. Point being, I won't be going over every little detail because, as a disclaimer, I've never played the original Nier, and I only played Nier Automata, so I only know what I am telling you in this video. Finally, before I go any further, let me just quickly ask you to subscribe to the channel if you like the content. If you need to see more, or feel you've seen enough and don't want to subscribe, consider subscribing to someone else you do like. I'm sure they would appreciate it. Now, let's get into it. The following is a collection of my own thoughts and knowledge and other sources from people smarter than I am, frankly. I won't be quoting anything specifically here, but just know I am using a collection of my own knowledge, impressions, and other sources and whatever else comes to my mind. First off, something you don't need to know going in, but it is something I find rather fascinating and something you might find interesting as well. There are actually two versions of the original game. So, you'll notice, for example, if you played the original release in the West, that the game's protagonist in Nier Replicant is comparably much younger. That is because the Western release featured a small change in the characters when compared to the Japan release. Nier Gestalt it was called, and it featured a small change where you played as Yona's father in Gestalt. In Replicant, which was the Japan-only release, though Japan got both versions, with just Gestalt coming to Xbox 360 and Replicant coming to PS3, you played as Yona's brother. Yona, of course, being the girl whose relationship to the main character depends on the version you played. In Replicant, she is your sister. In Gestalt, she is your daughter. Everything else about the game's story pretty much remained the same. Same story and everything, but the relationship between the two characters was ever so slightly altered to appeal to Western audiences. He's also been nicknamed Papa Nier by the community. Ain't that cute? The brother is widely accepted and even confirmed as the canonical protagonist, and that is the only real difference between the two titles. The remake, or remaster I guess is a better way of describing it, looks to be making that more cemented as canon for all audiences around the globe. Again, as someone who's never played the original Nier, it's more of a fascinating little piece of history when it comes to the original game. It is not going to matter when all is said and done, but it's a cool little piece of trivia that I thought you would find interesting. Next, if you look at the gameplay, it's very obvious that they tried to bring the original game more in line with Nier Automata. They even said as much. Of course, if you go back and look at the older gameplay, you will see the makings of what Nier Automata eventually was. You can clearly see they retained a lot of the visual elements in the new release from the old one. Difference is now it looks much clearer and the frame rate looks even better. Admittedly, there's not much more to say on the gameplay that you need to know before playing. It retains a lot of the refinements Nier Automata made to gameplay and combat systems from the original game, and there's plenty of weapons that you'll be able to get and use in the game and abilities to unlock. One thing I will note that is a bit important but not necessarily is that Replicant is a bit more fantasy based, as Automata takes place thousands of years after Replicant, so you can expect similar themes and similar systems and mechanics basically, but there will be some key differences to differentiate the two. A few things you will likely want to know about the story without knowing the story, of course. First is that there is, like Nier Automata, which is my reference point, there are multiple endings to the game. Automata had 26 different endings corresponding to different letters of the alphabet, though there were 5 main endings and the rest were joke endings or endings that resulted in a game over. Replicant has 4 main endings, so not quite as much as Automata, but still a significant amount. You'll need a few playthroughs to see them all, however, but not in the traditional way that you think, replay the whole game and make a different choice type of way. More like you play the game, beat it, and it brings you back to the point in the story and you keep playing and then keep getting different endings until you reach the true ending. That being said, I'm sure you'll have to do some specific things to get to certain endings, so that's not a blanket, just play the game, you'll be fine. I'm more describing that the multiple endings playthrough or multiple playthroughs part of it is not meant in a traditional manner. Also worth noting, you will need to get many of the game's weapons or do the various side stories in the game that award a weapon in order to gain access to the game's various endings. There will be a point of no return at some point in the story, and you'll likely be warned of this ahead of time, so you don't screw yourself. but it's good to know regardless. Lastly, on the story, it's been implied that there's going to be some cut content in the re-release and some reworking of different parts of the story possibly, so it's worth checking out and seeing if there are any differences, and that means even if you are a returning player, it gives you something to look forward to beyond reliving the story again. Should you play Nier Automata before playing Nier Replicant? Both games are not sequential to each other in that you don't need to play one to enjoy the other, or have played one to enjoy another. I played Nier Automata with no prior knowledge of the series, or type of game that it would be. It's one of my favorite games from the past generation despite that. However, if you are new to the series, definitely jump in with Replicant first, as chronologically it does take place before Automata, and even so, it will enrich your experience when you do play Nier Automata. Something else to note, as a fun fact, is that Nier itself is actually connected to a series of old role-playing games in the Drakengard series. Specifically, Nier takes place over 1,000 years after Drakengard's 5th ending. So, in that the Nier series itself is in the same universe as Drakengard, it is in an alternate timeline. I never played it, so again my knowledge there is limited, but I figured you would find that interesting. Also worth noting, Yoko Taro was the game director for a lot of the various Drakengard games and the Nier games, so it makes sense why both titles will retain that multiple ending style and even similar story elements and themes, even if it's only stylistically. Yoko Taro being well known of course for his very particular style of writing and his specific style of storytelling, and also being well known as someone who does not like to be photographed or videotaped, so he will often wear a mask. You don't necessarily need to know that in order to play Nier Replicant or Nier Automata, but I thought it was a fun little factoid for you. We know the music has been completely re-recorded and redone, with the original release's composer once again returning to do the score. In the recent PlayStation Underground video that dives a bit more into the remaster, they describe how the composer took a look at the score and felt he could do a bit better, and re-recorded it all and even rearranged a lot of it. So again, that might only be important in as far as if you have any nostalgia for the original game's soundtrack, or if you like the original game's soundtrack, but they also talk about how Yoko Taro believes music and games should be in service of whatever emotion the game is conveying. As far as the voice cast goes, most of the original voice cast returned to reprise their roles and re-record their lines. There are some new additions of course, but most of the characters are going to have the same voices as the original game. There's also going to be quite a bit of extra content being added to the release. It includes a new DLC pack called 15 Nightmares, new dungeons and costumes, and it apparently will even allow you to play as the Gestalt version of Nier. Whether that means just a costume or skin for the game, or to play as the full Papa Nier storyline, remains to be seen. There will also be some Nier Automata crossover content, and I am being purposely vague as to not give away any information or even suggest it, should you be wanting to remain ignorant. The game will also include a new DLC episode called Mermaid. I don't know anything about it beyond that, but if you want to see the trailer reveal for the extra content included in the release, it will be linked below, as well as an article it is linked with. Another fun fact for you before we close out this video, the original Nier was developed by Cavia, a now defunct studio, whose last release was in fact Nier. Developer Platinum Games developed the game's sequel, Automata, though Yoko Taro remained the driving force behind production. As for why the game is called Nier Replicant version 1.224744871139, nobody is really quite sure, and there are Reddit threads out there discussing what it could mean, and there are many theories. One of the most prominent ones is that the number is the square root of 1.5, which could imply the game is going to retell the narrative of the original game, and possibly include content that connects it to Automata more, or at least we know that it will. That would be my thinking, at least if you ask me. Okay, that is basically everything I think you should know, and some stuff maybe you don't need to know, but it's cool to know before jumping into the Nier Replicant remaster. Some of it is fun stuff to know, and I try to avoid being too specific on anything or give too much information that might spoil your enjoyment of the game. Some games are best going into it knowing as little as possible, so if this is the only video you watched, or you're watching this already having played it, then I'm glad to have you here. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did I miss anything? Did you play the original Nier? Are you gonna play the remaster? What is life? Don't answer that last one. Thanks for watching, and as usual, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If not, a thumbs down. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe. Until then, I'll see you next time. And thanks for watching. I love you. Maybe.